Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining my webinar on Enterprise UX, an enabler for legacy system transformation. This is a case study of Radiant's work with Verizon's network systems engineering. Before we jump into the presentation, I just want to say I hope everyone is safe and healthy in these trying times, and that this webinar can help take your mind off things for a little bit of the day. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please hold your questions. With that, let's get started. First, I just want to talk a little bit about Verizon. I'm sure everybody on the webinar is familiar with Verizon. Fortune ranked number 16, over 131 billion in consolidated total revenue last year, and just over 135,000 employees. More than 98% of the population has access to Verizon LTE. Their 100% all fiber Fios network has 6 million Fios internet and 4.5 million Fios video connections. And they recently have their media and technology companies combined assets from Yahoo and AOL to create Verizon Media. So taking a step back and looking at the industry and the company, at an industry level, 139 million Americans watch video on wireless traffic, and that's increasing 60% year over year. Obviously, major input needs to go into our wireless networks. 14.2 billion connections in the Internet of Things for 2019, with over 20 billion projected this year. Internet of Everything posed to generate over 14 trillion by 2027, and greater than 50% of all digital video ad spending is on the mobile platform. If we look at Verizon in terms of their growth and investment, as I mentioned, over 131 billion total operating revenue, 12 consecutive years of dividend increases. The Internet of Things revenues, including Verizon Connect, of 1.5 billion, and that's up 9.5% year over year. They're making huge capital expenditures, 17.7 billion last year, with 239.8 million investment in developing employees every year. So looking at leading the network evolution, from 1983 to present day, technology cycles are accelerating at an unprecedented pace. With every turn of the wheel, platforms are delivering more and more services. Posed to be the best 5G in the US, only time will truly tell what 5G will deliver. So looking at this graphic, Verizon used to be a voice company. It moved to data. Now, big wireless with moving to 5G. This requires transformation to adapt to change. Business cycles are becoming shorter. 5G is making simpler application technology keeping pace. So last year, Verizon came up with this Verizon 2.0 initiative from their CEO, Hans Vestberg. He announced Verizon 2.0, which the goal, he said, is a company-wide transformation that starts with network and aligns on top of that business groups, talent, go-to-market, and other strategic considerations. Verizon is building on their network transformation efforts and the intelligent edge architecture to deliver new customer experiences that optimize the growth opportunities they see as leaders in the 5G era. They are focused on how their technology can benefit customers' lives and society at large. This is really about new tech, massive change in how they do business. 2.0 is really about consolidation, simplification, and cost cutting. Really, they're asked to do more with less. So before we get into some figures around Verizon's network system engineering, let's do a quick poll. So Josh, can we launch the poll? So how many legacy applications did Verizon's network systems engineering have at the start of this digital transformation journey? 25, 62, 95, or greater than 110? Okay, we're going to end the poll and we'll share the results. So 27% thought 25, 9% at 95, and the vast majority of you thinking greater than 110. And I have to say, you guys are absolutely correct. So looking at, before we started this digital transformation journey, we were looking at over 110 legacy applications. That included over 20 UI technologies, and that spans over 10K active users daily, with over 10,000 digital facets, over 10 network stacks, spreading over 100 plus countries worldwide. So when we started this journey, we had challenges. There were silos, tons of technical debt, security issues, and obsolete technology. Now, that image that you see on your screen, that's actually a picture from a Verizon center. So when I say obsolete technology, I wasn't joking. To continue with our challenges, there were archaic interfaces. Users were required to engage with 20 plus applications daily, each having a unique interface with quality range from archaic to primitive, e.g. early web applications developed in the late 90s, to just simply frustrating, non-standard web UIs with poor usability. To add to this, these challenges, they were exacerbated by the complexity of the work itself. E.g., a single task could involve interacting with hundreds of screens across different systems. What this led to was high training time, legacy knowledge, and what we wanted to do is simplify for a new generation with the system helping them. Now, these are actual analytics that we pulled before this journey, with each one of those connections indicating a touch across pages and systems. Some of these you can see are jumping over 100 touches between them. So part of this transformation was also transforming the centers and building a next-gen workforce. So part of workforce transformation, we want high expectations, have users focus on the task, not the tool, enable innovation, as well as be able to compare the old and new state. This links back to what I was mentioning earlier about Verizon 2.0. So as we conducted our initial field studies, meeting with users and stakeholders, observations were made which influenced our transformation drivers. What we saw was dissonance between what users claim they need and what the business feels they truly need. E.g., users would say that they need all fields. Extensive usability barriers around locating relevant units of information, spatial inefficiencies throughout the UI, often little distinction between passive information display components and available interactive controls. So our preliminary conclusions were that we needed an extremely economical interface layout that maximizes usable screen real estate. Needed a novel approach to field retrieval and search. We needed standardization of field display and formatting. Needed standardization of selection, autocomplete behaviors, where common taxonomies of information are in use. And lastly, we needed mechanisms to clearly surface task controls distinguished from info display. So our approach in terms of enterprise UX. So starting on the right, looking at consumer user experience. These are applications that are typically built for a specific task. They will have a narrow scope, lower complexity, and higher choice. So if you were looking, say, for an email client, you could probably find 20, 30, 40, 50 options in your app store or online. When it comes to enterprise user experience, these are applications that are built for a specific domain, applications with broad scope and higher complexity. And when I say low user choice, I'm probably being pretty generous here because typically there is no user choice. Most organizations aren't going to build multiple applications to conduct a single enterprise function. So typically it's not a democracy. You get one application. So as part of our methodology, we took an evidence-based practice approach. What does evidence-based mean? It really translates to 3 principles. Utilize the best available research evidence bearing on whether and why a solution works. Utilize our expertise, e.g. our judgment and experience, to rapidly identify issues, the associated risks, and benefits of potential intervention. Third, focus on user preference and goals with continuous and constant focus on user data. These principles drive our approach into the steps you see here, where we want to be user-focused, continually improving, be data-driven, so that includes both qualitative and quantitative measures, be pattern-based, so we can focus on reusability, have measurable outcomes to know that when we're successful, but lastly, we need to deliver value. If we don't deliver value, then Verizon has no need to utilize our services. So continuing on with our approach, we started with our qualitative user feedback. This included things like field study, contextual inquiry, focus groups, and one-on-one interviews with users. Then we went to our empirical data, or really our quantitative information, where we looked at things like clickstream analytics and measures like the system usability scale and the technology acceptance model. Lastly, we looked at industry trends. What are the features and functions which industry leaders are using? Can we leverage those mental models in our enterprise setting? So we wanted to set ambitious goals for this project. We were not satisfied with single-digit changes. We were looking really for a non-linear drop. So that began with a greater than 25% reduction in time on task, a greater than 50% reduction in clicks, and greater than a 50% reduction in screens. There was literally a screen explosion, and we were trying to determine to what extent we could reduce the UI footprint. We knew this wouldn't be easy, but we wanted to make sure we set these lofty goals to try to make the biggest impact we possibly could. So as we set out on this digital transformation journey, one of the asks from Verizon was for a next generation user experience. But what does that mean? How do we know we achieved that goal? I then proposed these 5 guiding principles. Firstly, it should be adaptive, bends the technology to the user. System is aware of the user goals, activities, and preferences. Customize data and function to user needs. Context aware, accounts for context beyond the interface. Account for the user's spatial and temporal context. Integrate with the user's human network. Intuitive, matches users' mental and conceptual models. User's focus is on tasks, not how to complete them. The lowest friction simplicity. It should be efficient, straightforward and fast. Optimal utilization of system resources to achieve goals. Utilizing industry best practices. And lastly, anticipatory, knows what comes next. Understand user needs before they emerge. Bring relevant data and functions to the current task. These principles can then help us define solutions. As we jumped into our initial design exploration, We needed to focus heavily on the information architecture and step forward with meaningful design patterns. We wanted to increase efficiency, guided navigation with minimum number of steps, streamlining work, and automating unnecessary manual tasks. Reduce the cognitive load, providing the users with just enough information to reduce the cognitive load. Because what they've seen in their legacy systems is a kitchen sink approach where all fields would be displayed. Thus, customer commitment, an interactive AI chat to retrieve information and feedback in a conversational way, process automation to eliminate repetitive manual work. And lastly, we wanted to promote collaboration, so improve the communication tools to improve cross-team collaboration. So all of this coalesced to our outcome, which is Canvas. It is pervasive and responsive. So we have a desktop assistant, tablet responsive layouts, location awareness. It's highly technical capability. One-page application, client-side logic, data validation, access native system resources, interactive chatbot. Reduce cognitive load, things like guided navigation, field display automation, predictive analytics, a visual taxonomy, inline help. And lastly, it reinforced trust, state feedback, persistent save, automated error correction, swim lanes and status indicators. And reinforced trust is extremely important here because users had a bad experience with IT. They felt they were left out of the process. They didn't feel included in the creation of applications that they used every day. So we really wanted to hammer this point home during this journey. Continuing on our outcome, it had to be highly performant. So we utilized things like lazy loading, meaningful feedback on operations, and queued operations. For varied abilities, a tabbable UI, instant form validation, walkthroughs and inline help for the novice, and overrides for guided navigation for the expert. Now this, again, was extremely important as working with Verizon over the last 3 years, a lot of their workforce has been with the organization for 20, 25, even 30 years. As they start to depart, retire, and move on, Verizon is bringing on a younger group of personnel to replace them. We need systems that can accommodate both ends of this user spectrum. We wanted data-driven decisions, so heavily on end-user analytics, and promote engagement through things like personalization and game mechanics. So the results. We saw a 60% time on task reduction, 80% reduction in chair swivels. This is, a swivel is when a user jumps from one application to another to complete a task. And we saw 50% fewer clicks and screens. So Canvas is already in use by roughly 7,000 out of our target 10,000 users across the globe performing their day-to-day work. With a completely unified and thoroughly transformed user experience, Canvas has provided measurable results for these users. This information that I'm showing you here is backed by clickstream analytics and usability studies that we've actually conducted. So the benefits that we've achieved is we've seen an increase in productivity and workforce motivation while also lowering the system footprint. We've seen increased process repeatability while decreasing the functional silos. Again, increasing flexibility for innovation while decreasing those functional silos. So enables transformation requirements for the modernized backend. Really what it comes down to is UX drives what applications should do, not the other way around. So our UX approach benefited modernization effort. First, everything that we did coalesced to uniformity and consistency. First, reduce that high cost of touching legacy backends. So enable low touch backend, buy time for legacy systems if needed. Second, break emotional bond to systems. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the users that we worked with over the last couple of years have used the same application for 20, 30 years. Users now will feel less attached to a single system or tool. And this feeds well into number 3, change the culture. So one of the things that we encountered on this journey was that as we started this transformation, a lot of users were scared that the only application that they've ever known was being taken away from them. So we needed to reduce users' resistance to change over time and create a platform for more rapid innovation. And lastly, high complexity in the enterprise. The user interface is really only for handling fallouts only. Having a user interface is the exception, not the rule. So this means moving a lot to automation. So what are the lessons learned? We want to avoid feature fixation. Don't obsess over features for the sake of the feature. Obsess over the user experience. And this was a difficult challenge, as IT typically wants to be able to show off that shiny new toy that they've made. But we've managed to move the needle and make that culture shift. We don't want to underestimate the difficulty of getting access to end users. Even in an enterprise environment, they have jobs that they need to get done, and they're working in a very, very fast-paced environment with not much time to spare. There's challenges there of navigating cultural and structural issues within the organization, and change management is definitely required. As a UX person, this next one kills me to say, but UX really can't fix everything. Sometimes we have to make compromises when dealing with a complex enterprise IT ecosystem. We really needed to pick our battles with IT teams. And lastly, we want to find the patterns. So we came into this with a healthy dose of skepticism of any stakeholder who claims their use case is completely unique. Often it's really just an expression of a common design pattern. So if we develop with reusability in mind from day one, what we see is a lowering of our design and development cycle times and a more concise user experience that can help lower learnability. But all in all, really the takeaway is this is a journey. It takes time. We need to focus on change management. There will always be challenges. So lastly, the journey continues. We're still working on this project. We're still focused on reducing the UI footprint, increase automation across the portfolio. We're leaning heavily into machine learning use cases and AI right now, and business process abstraction. So that's it. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. And now I'll open it up to questions. Anybody with a question can just use the raise your hand function. No questions. Hey, Josh, are we seeing any?
Yes, Ricardo has a question.
Hey, Ricardo.
Hi, yeah. Thanks for the webinar. It's been quite insightful. So I've had a little experience working with the UI UX teams, but mainly from the product side of things. So what I found it quite challenging is how do you coordinate the UX team members? Everyone has a creative way of doing things. do they all follow the direction of a lead? Do you leave everyone working independently and pick up the best ideas? How does it work best for this example?
That's a great question. So we actually have developed a very extensive design system for our work with Verizon. It's actually based off of Brad Frost's atomic design, where we utilize the atoms, molecules, organisms, and templates. What this does is allow us to use those patterns that we developed at the beginning of the project quickly and easily, and help lower our cycle time, but also fostering continuity across functional areas. So by working within that design system, it helps mitigate some of those risks. But we also then, while we might be spread out across different applications, we still meet weekly to ensure that we are maintaining that uniformity and utilizing the proper design patterns when we can. Does that answer your question, Ricardo?
Yeah, it definitely helps. I'll do a bit more research on that design framework that you guys use.
Yeah, Brad Frost, it's an excellent one, Atomic Design. I actually have an article that I wrote about this on our website. So if you go to radiant.digital and go to the Insights tab, you will see an article about enterprise UX and atomic design. I definitely would recommend giving it a read.
Brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we have another question from Lam.
Hey, Lam.
Hey, Matt. Hey, thanks for the webinar.
Yep.
What are some of the go-to tools you use to handle work with Verizon? And would it be different for a smaller smaller project versus using something on an enterprise scale? What are your recommendations?
In terms of design tools?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at Radiant, we love to use Sketch and pair that with InVision and Zeppelin. But typically, as a consulting company, a lot of times we have to make concessions to use the tool that the client utilizes. So even on our engagement with Verizon, working with some of their design teams, half are on Adobe XD and the other half are on Sketch. So we really have to have all of our, all the different tools in our toolbox and be adaptive and really meet the needs or, the tools that our clients are using. But if I had to make a recommendation, I would tell everyone to use Sketch.
Well, thank you.
Yep. Thanks for the question.
Okay, we have another question from Susie.
Hey, Susie. Susie there?
Hello?
Hey, can hear you now.
Okay. Hey, thanks for the webinar. So you had mentioned that one of the biggest challenges was changing the culture for the users and just, how they're so used to using the same application for so many years. What are some tips that you have in, getting users to accept the new changes, and what are some tips that you have?
Yeah, so it's really about involving them as early and frequently in the process as humanly possible. I think one of the issues that we saw was that typically the way Verizon was working was that IT would create an application, kind of throw it over the fence to users, and they would have to just go figure it out. In terms of changing the culture, by involving them in the process and making sure that they felt like their voice was heard, they were more open to change in their systems because they felt like they had a stake in it. So we constantly follow up with our users through measures like the system usability scale to understand how they are reacting to the change, as well as doing outreach in terms of qualitative studies to speak to them and make them feel heard in terms of how they're actually consuming this in the real world. but it's that partnership and that participation that helps move the needle.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. I see we're right at stopping time, Josh. If we don't have any further questions, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. This was a great break from the day, and I appreciate everyone attending. Thank you so much.